Okay, it is 6:30 p.m. on June the 3rd. This is the Forest Lake Airport Commission meeting. Item number 1 on the agenda is roll call. Mr. Schmidt, would you please take roll?
Yes, Mr. Dahlbeck, not present. Mr. Husnick,
Here.
Mr. Munson,
Present.
Mr. Schmidt is here. Mr. Steeler,
Present.
we have 4 out of 5 here. Thank you.
Okay, the minutes from the March 4th meeting, are there any additions or changes from those minutes? If not, do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the March 4th meeting?
Mr. Chair, Sam Husnick, I would make a motion that we approve the minutes of the meeting that took place on March 4th.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second? I will second that. And all in favor of approving the minutes from the March 4th meeting? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Since there is no answer, I assume everyone said aye. So the meeting minutes from March 4th are approved. We'll move to number 3 on the agenda, Bolton and Mink. I will turn it over to Silas.
Sure, thanks, Mr. Steeler. Chris, if you're able to share the PDF memo with everyone, we can kind of walk through it that way so everyone can see it on their screen. All right, so kind of on the first item here for the runway taxiway apron and taxi lane pavement rehab project. I heard from the contractor yesterday afternoon, coincidentally, at the same time Mr. Undum was emailing out the first updates. So the contractor is planning on starting on Monday, June 8th. In talking with the contractor, their plan for runway 1331, there's only a little bit of crack sealing that's to be completed on the runway. The majority of the work will be in the pavement marking removals, and then to apply the surface treatment seal coat. So work on the runway is going to begin on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, they'll come in, remove the pavement markings, complete the crack sealing, and then with this type of seal coat, we're required to put test strips down to ensure that there's adequate friction obtained. Anytime you put a seal coat down, the friction is going to be reduced to the runway, and there's the specification only allows for a certain level of reduction in friction. So the contractor, to achieve the friction, they do different application rates of kind of the sand mixture with the oil content. So Aztec will put, probably 6 test strips down of varying application rates and follow up on Wednesday and then test them all to see which application rate is going to work the best. And then their plan is on Wednesday to actually complete all the seal coating on the runway, and then from there they'll move to the other pavement areas. So I know Mr. Undum had asked earlier kind of what the closure period for the runway would be. So right now I would definitely say, Tuesday, June 9th through Wednesday, June 10th. I know there's an email listing of tenants that Mr. Undum will distribute that information to, but I kind of wanted to bring it to the commission first to see if anyone knows of anything for sure that would restrict the contractor from closing the runway next Tuesday and Wednesday.
I'm not aware of anything.
I don't know of any, just of my one vote. That's all I can tell you.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I know there'll be notice going out from the city to let tenants and everything know. There's a possibility that they may need to come back on the runway on Thursday if they aren't able to get the seal coating complete on Tuesday. But in talking to the contractor, they're pretty confident that the test strips pass the specification requirement. They'll be able to get at least the runway sealed up on Wednesday. And then the rest of the project is crack repair, primarily in the hangar taxi lane areas. And then the seal coating in those areas will be completed after the runway. So there may be some periods of time where they'll be working kind of down your hangar taxi lane, things of that nature. When they're completing crack repair and the runway's open, there's no issue taxiing out and getting onto the runway. It's the seal coat cures pretty quickly, but if we get some temperatures like we have this week where it's in the high 80s, 90s, it takes a little bit longer to cure since it is an oil base. So we'll make sure we'll have a representative on site that will be available if any pilots or anyone's got questions about whether they can head out. But the good news is talking to the contractor, they're going to try to hit this project hard. So our hope is they'll be able to get the project done in less than the 10 days that we had specified. So once the seal coat cures, they'll come back and put the pavement markings down. So I'll work with Mr. Undum to also make sure there's a NOTAM issued for the interim that non-standard markings on the runway. But pretty good that the project will be starting next week, and kind of wanted to see if anyone had any specific questions about the project before they get started.
You answered my questions. I just wanted to make sure about the closure time. So as long as everybody's aware of it, that makes it a lot easier.
Sure. And the contractor starting at 9 o'clock Monday. I'll be out there with our field representative, Nick. If anyone wants to join us, we'll probably be meeting right around the terminal building there at 9. So you're more than welcome to join if you got questions or comments.
Silas, what was the final verdict on adjusting that taxiway line in front of hangars 1, 2, and 3?
So that's kind of jumps in number 3. So what, as we had discussed, Mr. Steeler, we were waiting to see the MnDOT's green list of funded projects for state fiscal year 21. One of the projects that we identified on there was an apron expansion specifically for tie downs, kind of off the taxi lane, south of the fueling area, and the arrival departure building is where we were going to expand the apron. Unfortunately, MnDOT hasn't released the list as of yet of funded projects, so I'm hopeful that comes out soon here. But otherwise, the way the marking is marked right now, it's 39.5 feet from the front face of the hangars on that southern edge, and that's to meet 1/2 of the taxi lane object-free area. There's nothing saying we couldn't move it a little further south, but I want to see if that apron expansion for tie downs was going to get funded, because if you move the pavement marking from now and then you construct the apron expansion, then we're going to have to revise the marking again. I know I'm verbally trying to explain it. Does that make sense to, I know Mr. Steeler has seen the layout, but maybe some of the other commissioners may have questions.
The reason I bring this up for the other commissioners, it was brought to my attention by the folks at Hangar 1 and Hangar 2. And they were asking, since that taxiway currently is wider in front of their hangar, if the yellow taxi line couldn't be pushed closer to the grass. But I understand what Silas is saying, that if this apron expansion gets accepted and approved, and then if we move that line ahead of that being approved, then that line might be in the wrong location at that time. So we kind of stuck where it is, I guess.
Any other questions? Sure. All right, kind of on to number 2, the master plan and ALP update. If you recall, it seems like a long time ago, March 4th, we actually got to meet in person and go through kind of the second update meeting for the master plan. Kind of the primary focus of that meeting was to kind of go through the facility requirements that Chris kind of worked through to determine, what features based on the user surveys that were received seem appropriate for Forest Lake. And then at that time, we also showed, 3 different building area alternatives and 2 runway alternatives. So kind of following up kind of this update here, we'll be going through kind of update meeting number 3, which is primarily to take the comments received from the Airport Commission and review kind of 2 different alternatives that we've put together based on the comments received from the commission, and see if we can move forward with selection of a preferred alternative to then submit to MnDOT for review. I believe John Fleming with MnDOT is on the line, so we'll get him more involved when we talk about the master plan update. So won't talk too much about that right now. And then kind of the third thing is kind of the capital improvement program. As Mr. Steeler mentioned, we're looking, one of the projects that was put on there for state fiscal year 21, which technically starts July 1st of this year, is to complete an apron expansion. It says 100 by 25, but it actually is 100 by 60. I apologize for that typo. A 25-foot wide apron expansion isn't going to be sufficient for tie downs, but the cost estimate there is correct for that pavement. So you can see the 4 projects that we put on the CIP for state fiscal 21 for the airport, construct these taxi lanes, extend the utilities, an apron expansion, and then, as Mr. Undum has mentioned previously, and the card reader system are going to need to be upgraded with kind of the newer technology with chip reader systems. MnDOT is still going to fund the projects at 95% state, 5% local. And we're just waiting for, like I mentioned, the green list of funded projects to come out later this month. So Chris, if you can go over to the CIP. So this is the funding rate letter that was just released, and you can see, so year 2021, the 4 projects we have identified for the airport. I was hoping to have the green list to share with the commission today, but I'm pretty confident it'll be available at the next commission meeting. Any questions about the CIP and the state funding rate letter?
Silas, this is John Schmidt. Our next Airport Commission meeting, according to our previously submitted minutes, is scheduled right now for July 1st. So we would be meeting in a month again. Does that work for you, or does that work conveniently for us, or is that advantageous for us for funding purposes and decision purposes? Or should we stretch it out longer?
On my side, Mr. Schmidt, it definitely works if the commission wants to meet again to review the green list of funded projects. If none of the projects are on the state's green list, then it may not necessitate a meeting. So as soon as I see the listing posted on MnDOT's website, I'll make sure Mr. Undum gets a copy for distribution.
Thank you.
As long as there's something going on and there's some activity, it might be a good idea to meet in a month period, just so we can stay on top of this. I know originally we were going to spread things out to 2-month, meetings, 2-month spread in the meetings, but trying to get this figured out with our funding, and it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have another meeting on the, was it July 1st, John? Is that what you said?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. I think with everything that's going on, especially with this, it's kind of important. Time is of the essence. If we get feedback from MnDOT on this stuff, that we meet. Yeah.
Definitely. Yep, I agree. So do we need any kind of a motion or anything to do that, or?
No, there's no motion required. I think, the intent here too, again, was to get the Airport Commission back on the regular meeting cadence. The next regular scheduled meeting is July 1st. So we'll just leave that alone at this point. No need to make a motion since it's already a scheduled and anticipated meeting. If the only change would be if the MnDOT list is not out by July 1st, we may, like we did last year, delay that back a week just so we can make sure that we have that MnDOT list for the July meeting. But at this point, we'll leave everything alone for the July 1st meeting so we can review the MnDOT funding list at that point.
Well, a couple emails will fix that if we need to. So.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions on the CIP?
Nope.
All right. That was all for now. Thanks, guys.
Okay, number 4 is our review of the airport layout plan.
All right, so Chris has got the update meeting number 3 presentation on the screen here. I believe you guys also have copies of it. If you want to go to the next slide, Chris. So, this is the master plan study process that we've been following. As I mentioned previously, the update meeting number 2 was to kind of go through the facility requirements to kind of really identify the future facility needs based on the demand of the user surveys that we had received, and then also to kind of inventory the existing facilities that were there and kind of identify a plan for future replacement of those. Most of the existing facilities are in good shape. I mean, the one good thing about the airport is the fuel tanks were installed above ground, which definitely is a good for future maintenance of them. So the airport's in great shape with existing facilities. It's just with the demand of pilots there and people wanting to base at the airport, that's kind of where the bread and butter of this master plan update is. So we also kind of introduced the first round of alternatives analysis. There were 3 alternatives presented for the building area, kind of the north, south, and the central area, and then also 2 alternatives shown for runway extensions. One, a 300-foot extension to get the airport to 3,000 feet, and another one to get to 3,300 feet. So the purpose of this meeting is to show everyone on the Airport Commission the comments received from the 4 commissioners, the 2 revised kind of alternatives, and to kind of work towards the selection of the preferred alternative. If possible, at today's meeting, great. If not, it can happen at the July 1st meeting for kind of submittal to MnDOT for review. And then the later steps after a preferred alternative is selected, then it's really upon Bolton and Mank to work on the implementation plan, which puts cost estimates together and kind of an estimated timeline for each one of those projects, and then starting of the ALP. I'll go to the next slide, Chris. So I've revised the schedule slightly here based on what you've seen previously, based on the revised meeting schedule for the airport. I know June is not a month we were scheduled to meet, but we're here now to kind of review the final alternatives. And then I believe September is still a regularly scheduled meeting, because you'll have June, July, August. Well, maybe I'm mistaken there too. Mr. Schmidt, is September a meeting?
Yeah, our next scheduled meetings are July 1st and September 2nd. That's what we have scheduled so
Okay.
far. But again, that's like Sam said, that's fluid. Just a couple of emails, we can fix that.
Sure. So right now we're still on schedule. I'm pleased that the Airport Commission was able to get this meeting scheduled to kind of review the alternatives. Next slide, Chris. So like I mentioned, the agenda for today is just reviewing the 2 alternatives that were revised based upon the comments received from the Airport Commission members. I know Mr. Undum sent the revised alternatives out last week, so I know some of the Airport Commission members will have some comments that we'll be able to kind of talk through those here once we get to that point.
Silas, I have a
Next
question
slide, Chris.
on here. One of the obstacles for any kind of extension on the runway are the wires on the southeast end of the height of those wires. Has that ever been double checked to see if that's the case, or if something we can do a little bit different there, or can we get along the way they are? Or I guess I don't know. Are those wires as
Yeah,
high
it's a
as
good.
they can?
Nope. If you recall, Mr. Husnick, I believe it was 2018. It was actually identified on the CIP to put obstruction lights on the power poles there.
Yeah.
MnDOT asked us to actually verify that the power poles are penetrations to the runway 31 approach surface. So Bolton and Mank, we've actually surveyed those power poles. I know for certain for the existing runway length, they are not penetrations to the approach surface, so we did not light them. As we get further along as a master plan study, one of the things Chris is going to analyze is the approach surface for any future ultimate runway lengths. And being we do have those power poles surveyed, it's going to be represented graphically whether or not, if you go with a 300 or 600 foot extension, if those poles would need to either be lowered, buried underground, or obstruction lights put on it. So good question, Mr. Husnick. It's definitely something that's on our radar.
Sure. Yeah, one of the alternatives that I've always asked for and presented is, if nothing else, what's wrong would be a displaced threshold, along that area. It would at least give an alternative for more runway for takeoff, for sure. Has that been discussed at all?
The way a displaced threshold works, Mr. Husnick, is it it's not usable length for takeoff. It increases your accelerated stopping distance available. So it's something that can be used in an event of an aborted landing or something along those lines,
Right.
because it's technically unusable pavement. That's where, you know, the, per the technical language for the FAA rises. But in this particular case, you know, Chris is going to get into more detail, but, you know, we do believe it is feasible to get an extension.
Okay, all right.
We haven't done an analysis of the
Threshold.
airspace at this point yet,
Yeah, this-
but the airport is zoned, has zoning in place for a 3,300-foot runway.
Right.
So there are some possibilities there of actually getting the runway extension.
Yeah, the argument about displaced thresholds when people.
And I think, John Fleming, I think you're on the line, correct?
That is correct. All I can say regarding displaced thresholds is that MnDOT generally prefers that pavement be usable. But if that was something you guys wanted to go ahead with, you'd have to have deeper conversations, probably with Rick Brunig, our safety guy.
You know, it's just a matter of it just adds to the safety thing for overrun or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's still paved. I know you're not supposed to use it for takeoffs or landings, but still, it's a piece of pavement that could be used for an overrun. That seems to me a lot more desirable than that grass that we have there now. Just my opinion.
Well, I'm confused here then, because I'm under the understanding that displaced thresholds are available for takeoff 90+% of the time. There's a few out there that aren't, but most that I run into are available for takeoff.
They're sure used for that. That's for darn sure. But that's another story.
It would be available for takeoff in the one direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And runway 3-1 is what we're talking about. I'm assuming.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
correct. Yeah. Yeah, you could just start the takeoff roll there. But anyways, all I'm looking for is alternatives in case we can't make the wire thing work out or whatever, you know. I want to try to get the most we can out of our airport here. So I'll move on, Silas. Thanks for your time.
All right, so I think Silas might have gotten dropped here, guys, but this is my spot anyway. So we're gonna go ahead and hop into the alternative. Does everybody still see the screen that I'm sharing here?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. Just a quick recap. We'll just brush over these. This is the alternatives we had looked at last time. So building out one here is the primarily T-hangers, all T-hangers on the north. We're showing the 80 by 80 commercials in the central region here. In the south, then we've got the 60 by 60s, which is real similar to the existing airport layout plan you guys had for the existing build out area here. Alternative 2 is kind of a mix on the north side of T-hangers and 60 by 60s. The central corporate area is kind of unchanged. Once again, we're showing 80 by 80s here. And then 40 by 40s in the southern portion, build out of the existing building area. So on to alternative 3. So this in the north area, we had shown the mix of 60 by 60s and 40 by 40s. Central area is similar. Once again, just the 80 by 80 commercial build out. Then in the southern area, we're showing 60 by 60s as well as 110 unit T-hanger. So these are the alternatives we had kind of discussed last time and asked for comments on. So a bunch of you guys had provided some comments. Just to go over the runway alternatives again, So we're showing a 300-foot extension, and we're also showing a 600-foot extension. So the 300-foot extension would take us up to 3,000-foot total runway length. The 600-foot extension would take us up to a 3,300-foot runway length, which is what you guys are currently zoned for at the airport right now, is 3,300 feet, which would be this runway configuration. And we'll see these again too as we hop into the modified alternatives that we have for the building areas for today. So kind of based on so those are the alternatives we looked at the last meeting we had here. So this is just kind of our comments matrix summary here. And if we take a look at this, just some of the high points to take a look at here. For building alternative 1, the south end, everybody indicated they wanted to see 60 by 60 private hangars and 80 by 80 corporate hangars. For building alternative 2, the north end combination of only 60 by 60 hangars or 60 by 60 NT hangars. And building alternative 3, the comments indicated they wanted to see north end, no 40 by 40 private hangars. So, and then in talking about the runway alternatives too, you know, we do believe that a 300-foot future should be shown in the event that MnDOT does not approve or have the funding for a total 3,300 feet. So in that scenario, what we can do is we would show a 300-foot future extension and a additional 300 feet or a 600-foot total ultimate extension. So that way, you know, if there is any funding issues, you know, we have that intermediate to get us to 3,000 feet, which will also help as far as, you know, getting up to that 3,000 feet to be able to get some of the GPS approaches and stuff in. So does anybody have any, we'll hop into the alternatives here, and then if you guys have any questions or comments, we can go through it all. So based on the comments, we've come up with 2 building area alternatives. So alternative 1 here is showing the north section only 60 by 60 hangars. So we've filled the entire north section with 60 by 60 hangars. We've added some vehicle parking up there. And if you take a look here, you see the trapezoids off each end of the runway. So we've got a whole bunch of trapezoids here, and they mean different things. So if we look at the red outline here is actually the MnDOT safety zoning. Did somebody have a question? Oh, sorry. So we see the MnDOT safety zone here, which is going to be our zone A. That's equal to 1/3 of the runway, 2/3 of the runway length, I'm sorry, and follows the approach surface out. So this is based on your current zoning, which is zoned for a 3,300-foot runway. If we also see inside of here, we see the blue trapezoid, which is kind of hidden under the red trapezoid there, but we see it cutting across here. So this is going to be our future MnDOT clear zone. Inside of that is our existing MnDOT clear zone, which is a fuchsia or a pink color. So these are some of the areas that we kind of try to avoid. It's generally not accepted to be, you know, to have new construction within the MnDOT safety zoning here. So if we take a look at this one, like we had just mentioned, all 60 by 60s in the north region, 10-foot spacing between the buildings, which ultimately equals out to a 70-foot by 119-foot lot for each one of the lots here. So you'd have a 70 by 119 lot, and the maximum building size on that lot would be a 60 by 60. That's what we're showing in the north area here. The central commercial area is very similar to the other alternatives, just showing 80 by 80s with 10-foot separation, as well as additional parking for the terminal area and the added commercial hangars. In the south area, there's 11 60 by 60s, which expand off of the existing building area. As with the north, those are 60 by 60 maximum hangar sizes with 119 by 70 lots. And if you see here, we're kind of showing just the existing, future, and ultimate runway configurations that we would recommend. So it's showing the two 300-foot extensions here. Does anybody have any questions on this one at all? All right, we'll hop into the next one then. So this next one is essentially showing a mix on the north side of 10-unit T hangars as well as 60 by 60 private hangars. So once again, the same scenario, you know, except we're showing the 10-unit T hangars here, which there's 4 10-unit T hangars. And then the 60 by 60s, as we had stated before, those lot sizes are going to be 119 by 70 with a 60 by 60 maximum hangar size. The commercial area in the middle, we retained the 80 by 80 hangars we were showing, added parking area, and the south region is the same, using the 60 by 60s and expanding with the existing configuration you guys are already using for the current building area. So like just the summary on these. So the alternative one, the south end is 11 lots. The lot size, sorry, that's a typo on that. The lot size is actually 70 by 119.
Pause for a second there, Chris.
Yep.
So the technical lot size that the city of Forest Lake uses is back of pavement to front of pavement. So that's where the 90-foot comes in. If you technically take it to half the taxi lane, it would be the 119.
Okay. From taxi lane edge to taxi lane edge is 119.
Correct.
Yep. So yes, that lot size would be smaller than that.
It gives you a 30-foot setback from the front of the hangar, you know, from the taxiway to the front of the hangar.
Correct.
That would be a 29.5-foot. Yep.
Yep.
So then the north end, 53 lots on the north end. Alternative 2, the south end is once again the 11 lots with maximum hangar size of 60 by 60. The 4 commercial lots in the central and 28 private lots on the north and 4 T hangars to the north. With the 2 extensions we were showing, once again, it's the 300-foot extension going to a 3,000-foot length, and the ultimate 600-foot extension going to a 3,300-foot length, which is what you guys are currently zoned for as well. So I'll hand it over to Silas to discuss the next steps on this as well, unless anybody has any questions on the building area alternatives right now too.
Yeah, Chris, it may be good sense to toggle back to the 2 alternative slides. I know one of the comments that Mr. Steeler had, if you go to one of the alternatives, Chris, is kind of development on the south side of the runway 31 side.
Yes.
The reason we did not show any development on the south side there is for a couple reasons. The first one being is that the city would need to construct access to get to that side of the runway with vehicles. Right now, there's just a gravel road there. So we need to look at, you know, either paving something or keeping a gravel road off of Forest Road North. The other thing is anyone who's operating on that side then is required to cross the active runway anytime they need to get to the fueling area. And those are things that we know from just past experience that unless you absolutely need to, it's not something that MnDOT encourages for development on the opposite side of a runway where crossing is something that's going to be a regular occurrence. Not to saying that's something we couldn't show there if the commission thinks it's something worth putting on the plan, but that's kind of the rationale for not on the south side of the runway, Mr. Steeler.
I think my thought on that was maintenance buildings for the airport. I mean, once you build out 64 more hangars, there's certainly budget for, you know, snow removal equipment and things that can be kept on site. And so I wasn't thinking of private hangars in those locations. I was thinking certain just maintenance, storage for maintenance equipment specifically for the airport. That was my thought.
Sure. The other point, Mr. Steele, the other thing we have, facing us on the south side is you see that blue, it's called BRL 20 foot. So what that is a building restriction line. So anything from that line further south can be 20 feet tall, but anything within that line closer to the runway has to be shorter than that. And you can see it that pretty much abuts the existing airport property line.
Right.
So any development shown further south of there, the city, I think it's city property there anyways, but they need to acquire it for the airport. So, knowing what the purpose is for kind of snow removal equipment or a maintenance building, to me, a 60 by 60 lot would be plenty large for, any snow removal or maintenance equipment that would need to be based at the airport. And my thoughts are the city could take one of those unless someone thinks differently, just kind of with some of the restrictions going south of the runway.
Right.
So kind of as Chris summarized, there's really the two revisions are kind of on the north end. One is a combination of 60 by 60s and a T hangar, and the other one is just showing 60 by 60 lots. Now, the one thing is showing a T hangar there or showing a box hangar doesn't restrict the city from constructing either or. If the ALP shows a hangar in those locations, it's not going to matter if it's shown as a T hangar or a box hangar. It's just a matter of preference for which type of layout that the airport commission wants to move forward with. So in a situation like Chris has here, I'm building alternative 1. In the event the city wants to construct a T hangar instead of bay hangars in any one of those rows, it surely can be modified to represent that.
Depends on the demand, at any given time.
Correct. And that's part of the rationale for showing the private hangars, Mr. Hosnick, is because the current funding mechanisms available to the city for constructing a T hangar is just via the state hangar loan. So the city could get a grant for the footings, foundation, slab, and then any of the apron and pavement work, but then the actual erection of the building itself would need to be via the loan. So a 20-year interest-free loan and 80% of the cost. So it's not always something that's going to cash flow for the city. So it's something the city would have to budget for each year for the loan payment.
Yeah, and the problem was we've never been able to make the numbers work out. So we kind of steered away from that. And the demand has been for private hangars. That we haven't heard any demand for, T hangar rental, except maybe one or two down, because there are some renters down in the old hangar area there. So, but that's just my 2 cents worth. I think we should stick with the private hangars and go from there.
So Mr. Hosnick, you're thinking building alternative 1?
Yeah, the comment I made, and if anybody can read it, there is that not to try to deal with T hangars. You always could, like you said before, you always have that opportunity because you could fit it into any of those lots there and keep the lot sizes, pretty much what we have now. And so that you can build those hangars pretty much the size that we have in the existing area there. So I just don't see the demand for anything else, that at the moment. And I don't know how many people are left on that list, Dan. Has that changed at all? I mean, people that are waiting for hangar space?
The hangar list is approximately the same. I don't have the most recent one, but it's in the teens, I believe, at last count. But I can look that up and confirm it.
Well, but the point is, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but the point is the demand seems to be that direction. That's what I'm seeing anyways. So anyways, my 2 cents worth, that's one vote. So that's my 2 cents worth, guys.
Sure. John, do you want to provide any comments that you may see from these two alternatives, the MnDOT perspective, since they were nice enough to join?
You mean John Fleming, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, John Fleming. Sorry, Mr. Smith.
Yes. MnDOT has no comments about the hangars at this time.
Thanks, John. Now, Mr. Smith, you and I had a conversation at the last airport commission meeting about, you may know some people, or you've heard in the past, people that want to put in a T hangar on their own and rent it out privately. Either one of these layouts doesn't restrict that. Even if building alternative one is chosen, if the city could combine the lots and rent them out as a T hangar, there wouldn't be anything restricting that. As long as it's shown as a hangar area on the ALP, it wouldn't require any modifications to that fact.
That sounds good.
So if there's any other comments or questions, or if someone wants to see something different, we certainly can take another revision on these alternatives. Now's a chance. We're hopeful to get some more comments from the commissioners, or even if you got something that comes to you in the weeks to follow, we can surely address it as well.
No, I just appreciate all your hard work, Silas. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate it, Mr. Husnick. Is there any thoughts on one of the other alternatives?
Do we have to have a vote, Silas? Do you want us to give you some direction and vote on either one of the alternatives, or does it matter that much?
Oh yeah, I mean, before we can start, drafting the ALP and then putting the narrative report together, we have to pin down what the preferred alternative is. So we narrowed these two options. I mean, we know what we're doing on the south side in the central area. It just comes down to what the airport commission and the city want to show on the north side of the airport development. So really have, based on the comments we got and the feedback from the last meeting, we're just looking at either show it all as 60 by 60 hangar lots, or a combination of T hangar and 60 by 60. So I'm not saying we need to come to a consensus on the preferred alternative today, but if that's kind of the next step, is to pick the preferred alternative to kind of proceed with drafting the airport layout plan and putting the report together.
I'd be in favor of alternative one with just all the 60 by 60 hangars.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, because I was going to actually make that as a motion and see how far it went, to see how far that goes. But if you guys want to make a motion to do that, I'll support it.
I so move for the alternative one, all 60 by 60 hangars.
I'll second it.
Seconded. Any additional discussion on that? If not, all in favor of?
Mr. Chairman, it might be a good idea when we're doing it, and what we're doing at the city council level, we're doing individual votes,
Kind of a roll call of votes with the
That's
city?
the word I was looking for, because it's so hard
Okay.
when everybody's voting, to know.
All right, we'll go through, and Mr. Dahlbeck is not here. Mr. Husnick, you're in favor of which alternate?
I'll vote aye.
Aye on alternative one. Mr. Schmidt?
Aye.
Aye on alternative one. Mr. Steeler votes aye on alternative one. And Mr. Munson?
Aye on alternative one.
That is 4 in favor and 1 not present. So that passes for alternative one, Silas.
Oh, that's great to hear. Chris, if you want to go to the next step slide.
Yep.
All right, so kind of where we're at, the airport commission has selected the preferred alternative here. So what we'll do now is we'll put the narrative together to kind of document how the airport commission arose to this alternative, and we'll submit that to MnDOT for review and approval. And then the plan right now is that the 4th airport master plan update meeting will be at the September 2nd airport commission meeting. And at that meeting, we'll definitely have kind of some cost estimating together for implementing the preferred alternative. And we'll present, the ALP sheet. It won't be the full document as of yet, but we'll at least give the commission an update on the progress that's being made now that we know a preferred alternative is there. So the most important part is selecting the preferred alternative, because that's going to really show the development for the foreseeable future, ideally 20 years at the airport. So it was a good process to kind of go through the commission members and to kind of get your guys' feedback and consensus. So we do appreciate your guys' willingness to participate on that part of it.
Anything
And
else we
there's-
need to take care of on this today?
No, that was all at this point, Mr. Steeler.
Okay, that's the end of agenda item number 4. Is there anyone on the commission who would like to bring up anything for the agenda that is not currently on it? Okay, Mr. Lund? Yes, Mr. Husnick?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, just as a reminder, we've made some really good steps in getting some things cleaned up at the airport. And one of the other things I want to work on too is on our airport, knowing what's going on with businesses out there and that sort of thing. We've had trouble with that in the past. And I think that we could, we don't have to change anything in the contracts or anything, but I just want everybody to be thinking about the airport guidelines and maybe mentioning in there that so we don't have this trouble anymore getting that squared away. So one of them is gone now, and that's a big relief. There's one we probably can't deal with, but for the future, we need to keep a good eye on that. So, and I think we can do that just with the airport guidelines. So maybe sometime we could bring that up and get that rolling at one of the meetings. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Hopefully, okay, thank you. Anyone else with any other items?
There are concerns about waterfowl in the watery area between the taxiway and the runway. I personally have walked up and down the runway multiple times in the last month, approximately 7 times that I've documented, and I've seen waterfowl there. I see that infield drainage improvements is on the CIP for 2022. I don't know that there's a lot we can do about it because our CIP is kind of a full plate right now. I'm just saying there are concerns, safety concerns about waterfowl in that area, and it can't get drained soon enough. I've taken photos of it every day for 13 days this month, just to document how much water is there. And again, I walked up and down the taxiway at night about when the sun is setting. It's a nice view, but waterfowl there is not a good view. So I'm just putting that on the record that it's a concern by a number of pilots.
Yeah, on that note, Mr. Schmidt, if you recall, in working with the commission and the city, we did identify the infield drainage improvements project as a
Yep.
2018 project. Mr. Undum and I had a conversation with Dan Berner, who's the airport engineer for central part of the state for Forest Lake. And he stated at that time that funding for the plan was to extend the drain tile through that infield area. It's every time I've been to the airport during the summer, it's saturated. And Mr. Goodman, the city engineer, has talked to the maintenance operations there, and they've indicated they can only mow that area a couple times a year because otherwise they get the tractor stuck. So we put together a cost estimate and a plan to extend the tile. But unfortunately, MnDOT's characterization is that it was a design error during the initial construction of the runway, that the drain tile should have been extended at that period of time. So they don't fund corrections. And that's why they've told us that receiving state funding for extension of the drain tiles is going to be unlikely. So we've just kept pushing the project back on the CIP. And I know Mr. Undum has had discussions about putting it as a locally funded project on the overall city CIP. So it is something that I know Mr. Undum is aware of, and I know it has had some discussion at the council level as well.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Mr. Undum, how do we go about opening the floor to the general public, or is that not possible?
It is not possible with this current meeting setup. We have to just take a commission feedback at this point. It is the live feed meets the requirement for public broadcast for the meeting. We're not able to take comments at this point from the public.
Okay, so I have a motion to adjourn.
John Schmidt, so moves.
A
I'll
second.
Let's take second.
Okay. We'll take roll on adjournment. And just say aye if you're in favor of adjournment. Mr. Husnick,
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt,
Aye.
Mr. Munson,
Aye.
and myself, aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.